lot of takes have already been made about the DeAndre Hopkins pickup by the Tennessee Titans. Was he overpaid? Did they actually get him at a value considering the current wide receiver market where the top guys are getting like 25 to 30 million a year? Why even choose Tennessee to begin with rather than, say, the job opening that was here in New York, which is where I'm filming this from? What even is his role going to be in the Tim Kelly offense, which coincidentally he's already played in when he was back in Houston in 2019? There's a lot of questions, a lot of speculation. But maybe the most important question of them all hasn't really been asked yet. Is DeAndre Hopkins still even a top-tier receiver to begin with? Is DeAndre Hopkins still DeAndre Hopkins? We're going to break this video up into 3 parts. What can Hopkins still do at a high level? What can he not do at a high level anymore? And what role does this skill set actually translate to in the Titans offense? We'll start with what he can do. Obviously, the ball skills and contested catchability has gone nowhere. That's one of the few things that really doesn't ever leave an aging receiver. After all, if you have elite hands when you're young, you're probably going to have elite hands when you're old too, especially in contested catch situations down in the red zone or over the middle. Hopkins has always had an absolute warrior mentality when taking and receiving contact from linebackers and safeties, and he's still going to have that quality in Tennessee as well. What he's also still going to have with the Titans is top-tier route running ability and a great feel for zone coverages. Looking back at his film from last season in Arizona, even though he's clearly lost a step or two of speed and quickness over the years, his understanding of coverage structures as well as in how DBs operate from a technical perspective means that he can really weaponize his experience and football IQ more so than his physical skills. Take this snap against the Vikings last year as an example. On first viewing, this looks like Hopkins just ran a deep out against cover 3 and the corner lost track of him and it was an easy pitch and catch completion. But it's how Hopkins ran this route and the pre-snap read that he made that informed him how to run this route that really matters the most here. Before the ball is snapped, the Vikings are in what looks to be a quarters coverage look with a 5-1 front structure that Vic Fangio and all of his disciples refer to as penny. And this front structure is important because the Mike is all the way in a 50 alignment on the opposite side of the running back so that Minnesota can properly fit the run here, while the nickel is outside leveraged on the number 2 receiver to the passing strength of the offensive formation. Why that matters is because the Cardinals are going to take their number 1 to the passing strength, which is Rondale Moore, and put him in what's called an orbit motion. Orbit motions are a good way to create a fast threat into the opposite flat right as the ball is snapped, and that's a huge problem for defenses because if you get caught in a front that matches a fast threat to the flat with a linebacker, or in this case, a linebacker that's lined up as an edge, that's a recipe for disaster because that means you might end up with Jordan Hicks matched up in space on a guy like Rondale, which nobody in Minnesota actually wants. A common adjustment that many defenses have for this, and especially defenses in the general Fangio cinematic universe, is that in order to avoid that disastrous matchup, they do what's called spinning the secondary at the last moment to match that motion with a DB that is coming from an advantageous leverage position from the top down, which essentially means they're just converting a quarters coverage look into a cover 3 look on the fly right as the ball is snapped. But here's the thing. Hopkins knows all of this. Any receiver that's played as long as he has knows everything that's happening here because he's seen 1,000 rotations just like this one, so he knows almost unequivocally that he's getting a cover 3 look against orbit. And because he made that pre-snap read, Hopkins runs this out route in a very deliberate way to beat cover 3. Any corner in this coverage, especially from outside leverage several yards off the receiver, is going to do what's called a zone turn as the ball is snapped, meaning they put their butt to the sideline, they read the initial stem of the route to get an idea of where it's going, and then they play it from there with eyes on the quarterback. Hopkins plays into that technique by selling a vertical route and not widening too early because he wants to act like he's running a fade. On a fade route, you don't really want to widen and get to the sideline until the last possible moment because it's more about getting to a specific landmark than anything else, generally between 22 and 25 yards down the field, right at the sideline. And you want to leave yourself a lot of space outside until your final few steps so that you could pretty much drift under the ball away from the DB without worrying about running yourself out of bounds too early. So again, Hopkins is holding a tight vertical stem here, selling that he's trying to keep the DB near the numbers so that he can run a fade into that space. And once he gets within about 2 yards of that DB, that's when he makes this move to really sell that fade even more. D-Hop starts to slip outside, getting behind the corner's hip and into his blind spot, which makes the corner think that he's drifting early into that sideline for the fade. But what Hopkins is actually doing is he's using that blind spot to give himself easy separation on a 15-yard out route. It's about breaking the vision of the DB for just long enough to snap the route off and get free space, and this is more of a wily old veteran move than you might think. Compare Hopkins' route that you just saw to that of, say, a young Mike Williams back in 2020 in Justin Herbert's rookie year, and you will see the difference. Look at how Williams ran this route as a much less experienced receiver at the time. Again, this is still cover 3, and it's still an out route from roughly the same split at roughly the same depth, but there is a major problem with it. Williams stems inside like he's trying to fake a seam route so that he can bait Xavier Howard into biting on it and giving up that space to operate outside, all without realizing that this is not Xavier's first rodeo. He's been around long enough himself that he's not going to crash inside unless he has a very good reason to, and as long as he has help inside from the post safety, he doesn't really have a good reason to. So without that motivation to constrict down into the seam area, Howard just stays disciplined and keeps his outside leverage, waiting essentially for Williams to just come to him. And when Williams does finally bend his route to the sideline, Howard is in such an advantageous position because he can get eyes on the receiver and the quarterback simultaneously. He has nobody in his blind spot breaking that vision, so he doesn't have to try to play the ball and a receiver that he can't see. He could just be fast and aggressive and immediately drive on the throw to pick it off, which he does. Going back to that Hopkins route that worked versus the Williams route that didn't, that initial stem from DeAndre is the difference that a smart veteran receiver brings to the table. A well-run route, even if it seems very innocuous, can be the difference between a 17-yard gain and a turnover. And believe me, that difference compounds itself over and over and over again, play after play, week after week. Now, having said all of that, clearly Hopkins still does have a skill set that translates to production at the pro level because great route running plus great hands will never truly go out of style. However, he isn't necessarily still a well-rounded receiver because there's one thing that he cannot do anymore, and that's be a vertical threat. Going back to Hopkins' prime in Houston 5 or 6 years ago, even with a relatively average 40 time coming out of Clemson at 4.57, he was so explosive in short areas that he still had the burst to climb on top of corners quickly on verticals, stack them in his route, and be a legitimate threat down the field. He had serious juice off the line, and even though nobody would ever confuse his pure long speed with, say, Deshaun Jackson, the fact that he could accelerate up to his top speed very quickly meant that he dusted a lot of top-tier corners on go balls down the sideline. He was an all-pro for a reason, after all. Unfortunately, in Arizona last year, though, that short area burst seemed to not really be there anymore. He doesn't fight through contact and stack on corners quickly off his release like he used to. He'll get stuck on press coverage way more often, and he just doesn't have the gas to get over the top in a timely manner, even when he does get a free release. In fact, from week 7 onwards, which is when Hopkins came back from his suspension in 2022, he had literally only 4 targets of 20+ yards against press coverage, which was 55th among all receivers going against press. And technically on those 4 deep targets, he only had 1 catch against press. I say technically, by the way, because it really was just Michael Davis redirecting him in a zone coverage, not actually playing press man. So you could be justified in saying that Hopkins had 0 deep catches against press the whole season, but tomato, I guess I'll just count it anyway. What I'm really trying to say here, though, is that D-Hop just doesn't have the legs to win down the field anymore. And I do want to emphasize that that's okay. I mean, all receivers eventually lose that step, but it does mean that for our purposes this episode, and especially for fantasy purposes, we should be altering our expectations for what his actual role in this offense is going to be. Also, by the way, quick shameless plug, my fantasy rankings are still live over on the Patreon for all patrons of all tiers, even the $1 tier. So if you're watching this and you're a patron, go grab those because I just dropped version 3, which has all the updates in it from everything that happened during the preseason. Obviously, that's linked down in the description below. But anyway, plug over. Let's talk about roles here for Hopkins. Looking back at his past with Tim Kelly, what did he do in that system in Houston, and how is that going to translate to this year when he's with Kelly again in Tennessee? Well, honestly, the answer is that he's probably going to be doing more of the same. If you look at Hopkins' total route tree from 2019 with Kelly, about 37% of these routes that you're looking at were from the slot. He was used inside all the time, and especially as a quick underneath receiver, to the point where nearly 64% of all of his catches were just on slants, out routes, hitch routes, and crossing routes, while only catching 2 go routes the entire season. If you compare that 37% slot alignment to 2018 in Houston, the year before that, in that season he only lined up inside about 20% of the time, and the year before that in 2017 was even less at about 16%. So even 4 years ago at this point, Tim Kelly recognized that Hopkins was starting to lose some of his juice, and he began moving him inside into a more late career Anquan Bolden-ish type of role, which mind you did work very well for him. In 2023, almost half a decade after that season in Houston, now with even more wear and tear put on those tires, I personally think that his slot usage will be significantly higher than 37%. To the point where I'd bet that the majority of his snaps will actually be inside this year, not outside. At this stage in their respective careers, Treylon Burks has far more burst to stack on DBs and get down the boundary for vertical throw opportunities, and I'd bet that once he is fully healthy, he and not Hopkins will line up as the X receiver outside, while Hopkins himself does all the dirty work using his route savviness, toughness, and ball skills to rack up a bunch of catches under 20 yards. Elsewhere in the Titans offense, Chig Okonkwo is going to be their go-to yak monster, especially on slide routes off of play action, or in the screen game, or in the RPO game, while Nick Westbrook-Akine is likely going to be their do-it-all Z receiver that can line up anywhere and do a bit of everything. Oh, and then there's also Kyle Phillips, a former Shrine Bowl favorite of mine, who also is a very deadly slot option himself if Kelly wants to put Hopkins outside for a few snaps. Suffice to say, the Titans actually have plenty of weapons in their passing game. It certainly didn't feel like that going into this offseason, but now with the regular season about to start up, I honestly do think that Tennessee has a lot of different flavors of receiver to work with here, especially after the addition of DeAndre Hopkins. Is D-Hop what he once was as like an alpha number 1 receiver? Absolutely not. And anybody who watched his Cardinals tape last year would probably tell you that. He has lost a step, or maybe 2 steps, but that doesn't mean that he still can't be a very productive player. It'll be a different kind of production, a more volume-based, first down generating, middle of the field controlling, red zone dominating type of production, but that's still production nonetheless. When the Titans want a big play, they're going to go to Treylon Burks. That much is clear and obvious. But when it's 3rd and 6 in a close game against Cincinnati or Baltimore, and they absolutely need a first down right now, we all know who's getting the ball. It's the same guy who's got it for over a decade in the league that we know will never let us down when we need him the most. DeAndre fucking Hopkins. Now, obviously, I'm filming this episode from the road. I'm out here in New York in the first place for the annual BDGE Fantasy Live Draft Weekend, so I flew out to Manhattan for that, and then snuck away to Brooklyn in the middle of the night, literally middle of the night. It's like 1 a.m. when I'm filming this. And also, apparently, I chose the windiest spot in all of New York to shoot this, so that's my bad. But every time I do an episode like this from the road, pretty much anything you've watched on this channel from the road over the last 2.5 years, I've had this with me. This is called The Shed, and it's the travel bag that Manscaped makes that I keep all of my Manscaped products in, as well as everything that Manscaped, doesn't make, my toothbrush, toothpaste, all that kind of stuff. But I've been a Manscaped household for many years at this point, and they've never steered me wrong. I've had the same trimmer for over 2 years now, and it's still going strong. It's like the Lawnmower 4.0. It's waterproof. It's a really powerful motor, skin-safe technology, so it reduces, all the nicks and cuts that you get from maybe other trimmer brands. You're not going to get that from Manscaped. It's a great trimmer. I also have the nose hair trimmer. Their cologne low-key really good. The body washes, the lotions, they have everything. Like literally every product you can think of for grooming, they have. They even have, I'm not even kidding, it's a 3-blade, essentially contoured razor for your groin. Like it's an easier razor to shave with in that particular area, if that happens to be more your speed. But that razor is like literally designed just for that. So it's safer, so to speak. Pretty much anything you can think of to take care of your body, Manscaped makes. And I keep it all in this bag whenever I do these episodes on the road. So I can personally attest to the fact that I like Manscaped products a lot. I've used them for a long time. Holy shit, that wind is really going now, so I'm going to end this as fast as I possibly can because somehow summer in New York is very, very cold. So all I'm going to ask is that you just browse the Manscaped catalog and just see if there's anything you're interested in. You know, obviously, not everybody's going to be in need of a trimmer or a nose hair trimmer or, a razor specifically designed for your balls. Like, not everybody's going to need that, right? It's a very niche application, but just browse the catalog, see if there's anything that you need. And if you do find something that you need, you can use my promo code FILMROOM. That will give you a 20% discount plus free shipping and 2 free gifts, with one of those free gifts being this travel bag. So again, just browse the catalog. There's the discount if you want it. Promo code FILMROOM, 20% off. Travel bag, shipping, all that kind of stuff. I have 2 more episodes to do from New York before I leave here, both on the Jets and Giants. Oh my God, is the wind stopping right as I'm done recording? Come on, God. Anyway, I'm going to go get to work on the Jets and Giants episode. Those will be out very soon. I'm going to try to shoot it from a less windy place. I'll see you guys later.